he said,
There we go.
so it's okay for the women to come to the men's fellowship, right? And I said, no.
Uh-oh. You're in trouble.
I know.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some letters about that. Thanks.
That was a setup, Mark. Didn't the Girl
Right.
Scouts and the Boy Scouts have an issue like this?
Pretty much, yeah. It's only a matter of time. Anyway, Mr. Lanaway, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mark. I don't know how this is going to go because this is sort of an unusual presentation because, really, I'm going to focus on the last year or so, which is the time that I've been ill. I think I regaled you with everything other than a statement of faith when I spoke the first time. So, this is a continuation of the trend. But I thought it could be helpful to some people because, this whole illness, pancreatic cancer is what I have for those who don't know. And I've had it for, I guess, about 10 months. And it arrived as a complete bolt from the blue. I had just had my annual checkup. My sugars said I was pre-diabetic, but there was nothing else. So it was furthest from my mind as that something serious was about to happen. We always do a pilgrimage to our summer cottage in Canada for a couple of months, or in Janet's case, for 4 or 5 months. Her soul is up there. She just loves it. And the whole family does as well. So it's become a bit of obviously a destination point as kids travel. It's the place we all come back to. So this last year, because of COVID, we couldn't have any children up at the cottage when we went up. So the children, our youngest will be 31 next month, but none of them could be there with us for 2 weeks. We had quarantine by ourselves. When you went across the border, we had to say, okay, where are you going? How are you going to get food and drink, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you, dear. So we were, not overly concerned because, we'd opened the cottage before by ourselves. But because now I'm sort of really fully retired, I'm not really traveling all that much, right? 4 or 5 times a year. We both were going up with loaded SUVs. And when you get there, we're water access. So you have to unload everything you've got in the car. And it's unusual for us to have 2 full SUVs, but we did last May. So we had to get it all on the pontoon boat, which was probably the heaviest load the pontoon boat has ever had or ever hopes to have. And then get it. So then we drove over to the land, to our dock, which, the dock had been put in by the guys we have do that up there. And a couple of the boys had been up there. Our boys had been up there to open up partially. So, get all the heavy furniture out and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we get all the stuff out of the pontoon boat, and some of this stuff is heavy. Like we've got duffel bags that you would have if you were going on a long ski trip. We had done a Costco run, so we had all kinds of illegal meat in the coolers that we arrived up there with, which were of course heavy as well. So we then just started lugging the stuff up the hill, and Janet's experienced cottager, so she's just as effective at this as I am. So we load a bunch of stuff up, and then we get to a point where we've got all the food up there. So Janet said, why don't I'm going to start unpacking the food. I'll clean the kitchen. We'll start putting things away in the fridge, the freezer, blah, blah, blah. And the things that were left were, some of the heaviest things. So I keep slugging those up to the cottage. And eventually get it all up there, but I am just shot by the time I'm finished. It's also cocktail hour, but that isn't why I was shot. I wasn't making it up.
Yeah.
physically exhausted in a way that, you know, I've not usually after that kind of effort. So, so Jan said, well, sit down and you know, just relax. I'm just finishing putting things away and, you know, nothing heavy in here, etc. So I just sat there. Janet we had a very casual dinner kind of thing, burgers or something. I don't remember. Anyway, still shot, go to bed, get up in the morning, still shot. I mean, I can barely put one foot in front of the other. And that carries on for like 6-7 days. We're on a 2-week quarantine. So it's not like we can just pop into the walk-in clinic and get checked out. And around about Tuesday of week 2, Janet looked at me and she said, your eyes are yellow. I said, no, they're not. She said, yes, they are. And on Wednesday of that week, she said, your skin's getting yellow. And I said, no, it's not. And she said, yes, it is. As most constructive conversations go between man and wife. Anyway, we decided, okay, we're out of quarantine on Friday. So we'll just tough it out for a couple of days. And then we'll go into the walk-in clinic on Friday and see what he has to say. So we went to the walk-in clinic on Friday, and we know him because there's a couple of our prescriptions that are ludicrously expensive down here. And amazingly, we always forget to bring those drugs with us when we go to Canada. And he says, oh dear, how many do you need? And I said, well, you know, we don't know how long we're going to stay. Well, why don't I give you a year's supply? So we know the guy reasonably well. And so we went in to see him. And he said, so what's up? But he's looking at me intently anyway. And Janet says, well, he's been exhausted for the last couple of weeks since we humped everything up to the cottage. And I think his eyes are yellow and his skin's getting yellow. And he looks at me, he said, yeah, they are. And he says, well, what we're going to do is I'm just going to send you for a lot of blood work. And then you come back on Tuesday, because this was the May long weekend in Canada, which is a week before Memorial Day. I said, you come back Tuesday morning, I'll have all the results of the blood work and we'll take it from there. So we went back to the cottage, spent the weekend and just kind of no idea really what's going on. Although I think I said to him, I said, there's only one thing you cannot tell me. He said, what's that? I said, you cannot tell me that I can't drink this summer. And he said, I'll be honest. He said, that would be the best thing I would be telling you on Tuesday. So we knew he had a clue what he was dealing with, but couldn't conclusively say so. So this kind of put things to a different level. So we then, of course, spent the weekend thinking, wondering if one of our kids had been up there, they would have been going down all kinds of wormholes on the internet trying to figure it out, but we didn't do that. So we went in to the clinic again on Tuesday morning, first appointment. And he said, well, I've got the results of the blood up back. He said, and I've been in touch with the hospital, and I've arranged for you to go to Emerge over there and for them to have a look at you and perhaps take some pictures like a CAT scan. So anyway, we didn't think that sounded like good news, but we went, of course. And the doctors at the hospital put me in a CAT scan. And an hour or two later, they came out and they'd had a bit of a consultation, and they said, well, you have a tumor in the pancreas. We don't have the ability at this hospital to take any samples of the tumor to, diagnose whether it's a cancer or benign. And we don't have any ability to put in a stent, which is what you probably need, because the tumor was right down by where the bile duct is. So everything that lets stuff out of the pancreas was where the tumor was gathering. So they said, you know, we could try to get you set up with a hospital in Toronto where they've got the right equipment and got the right surgeons and so on. He said, but, you know, in all honesty, why would you do that? He said, you guys should get in the car and drive home where your insurance is, where your doctors are, where your infrastructure is. So that kind of changed our plans for the short and longer term over the course of the summer. Now, if I'm taking too long with this, somebody please tell me, because I'm just kind of stream of consciousness. You can tell I don't have any of this written out. I've just got a few bullet points. But if at some point somebody nods off, I'll take that as a hint.
No, it's just
Or
fine,
if
John. It's great.
or if somebody like in the movie Airplane shows up with a self-attached noose to their neck, as if they're trying to hang themselves to get out of it, I'll also stop. But so this is a big adjustment. We had stopped at our son's and done a driveway exchange where he had given us some additional groceries for us to take up to the cottage. And they had a dog, and they also had a 1-year-old. So we figured this was a great, not even a 1-year-old, I guess she was about 6 months then. So this was a great opportunity for the poor dog to get out and be the center of attention somewhere for a little while. So we volunteered to take the dog with us. So we had the dog, we had all the stuff at the cottage, which was now partially unpacked and kind of set up for the summer. Janet had a really good friend who was coming to spend a couple of days with us and, obviously help out a bit, and just they hadn't seen each other for a long time, obviously. This was not absolutely within the quarantine requirements, but anyways, it turned out she couldn't stay anyway because we got this word when they said you need to go home. Janet called her and said, don't come to the cottage, come to Bracebridge, go to the hospital in Bracebridge. Because, brought her quickly up to date on what had happened and said that we have to go back home. So she said, I'm going back to the cottage now. I'm going to pack the things that we have to pack, that we can take back. And if you come and get John, you can go with him to pick up whatever prescriptions the doctors give us or whatever. A little sidebar. One of the things that I didn't know, and probably a lot of you don't know, is if you get pancreatic cancer, not only are you a cancer patient overnight, you're a raging diabetic, because pancreas does two things. It puts out, and if I misspeak at any point here, Sherm, you speak up, because Sherm is the guy who really understands this stuff. He's probably marking me. I'm probably get C- right now. But what it does is it's digestive enzymes, so that your food doesn't just pass through, it gets digested and the good stuff goes into your body. And it also produces insulin. So if there's blockage, both of those things stop happening. So that was a second thing, because, I went from being pre-diabetic to being a raging diabetic overnight. So anyway, Janet's friend, has probably already driven 200 miles when she reaches her in the car, goes the additional 150 miles to get to Bracebridge. And she picks me up, and we had to get some diabetic supplies, which is why that occurred to me, and some other things that we did. And then we go back to the landing, at which point Janet has just arrived at the landing with all the stuff we're going to take home, which of course is about 1/10 of the stuff we brought up. Obviously we're also not taking 2 cars home, we're taking 1 car home. So we load up the car. Poor Jane gets back in her car and drives the 350 miles back to where she came from. There wasn't even a relative on the way that she could stop overnight. And we take off to we did overnight at our son's in Pickering, which is about 2 hours south of us. And we spent the night there, took the poor dog home, who clearly is thinking, what the heck happened? I'm back with this thing again. The attention sucker. However, we got up the next morning around about 8 and headed to Norwalk. I called the doctor I knew best, who's attached to Norwalk, who's Dr. Hale, a gastroenterologist. And he said, okay, I'm going to get you all set up. He said, just don't go home, just go straight to the emergency. So that's ultimately what we did. And got admitted. And the next day, so poor Janet, of course, had to do all the driving. She was a little tired by the time we got there. We got to the hospital probably about 6 or 7, I guess, maybe later. No, it was probably later. And then, you know, she had to hang out until they actually got me admitted, found me a bed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So she got home a little late, a little tired. And a little shell-shocked, as was I. But here's the great thing about American healthcare: if you have insurance, and if you have money, and if you're able to reach out to people who could help, you get what you need right away. In Canada, if you need, you know, something that is going to take a long time to actually do anything for you, you get on the list, and the list moves up. Some people will leave the country to go to Buffalo or something to get the initial diagnosis and so on. But as my brother, who's a doctor in Calgary, says, because I never understood, why doesn't Canada have a 2-tier healthcare system? If I could pay to get myself out of the line, why wouldn't you do that? It makes the line shorter and save some money for the healthcare system. They said, well, the problem with that is once you get your diagnosis, you're going to want treatment, and the treatment is no faster than the diagnosis. So it's really, really, for people like us, the American system is so much better because of the ability to actually get what you need, and the quality of the people the doctors and so on. The doctors up there are great. But they don't have the same kind of support with equipment and so on. So that's one sidebar is, personally, as a value, I kind of think everyone ought to have insurance. And I know that you couldn't have insurance and everyone get the kind of care I got when I got back down here. It'd just be prohibitively expensive. So you make some compromises. Their compromise is, doesn't matter how much money you've got, you wait your turn. And our compromise is, we live with the fact that there's a whole bunch of people in the lower echelons who are either not attached to a doctor or don't get you know, the kind of service that I got. So that's a sidebar. And that on the other hand, you know, prescription drugs is the other half of that. Literally, there were 2 drugs where my cost, because it was they're not off patent or whatever, was going to be 10 times what I paid in Canada. And now I don't care how you look at that. People are not dropping dead because of the horrendous quality of prescription medications in Canada. As a matter of fact, there would be an outrage if one did, just as there would be down here. So it's not a point of distinction of the quality of the drugs, how much you're paying for them. It's the fact we refuse to negotiate prescription drug pricing. So literally that we are the default funder of all research and development that the drug companies have to incur. Now, if I've offended anyone on here as a senior executive of a pharmaceutical company, tell me I'm lying, but it's really quite interesting. So I got to see both sides of that divide. So the punchline there is the next day, like we got there on I guess it was a Tuesday night. no, Wednesday night. The next day, I had, they took the samples to diagnose that it was indeed a cancer, put in a stent so that the things could flow out of the pancreas again. God knows how long I would have waited for that in Canada. And Norwalk Hospital is great. So Stanford, I'm sure, Sherm, but I was in Norwalk, so that's the one I can assess. Good quality, good people, and a very sort of patient oriented. So a very good experience. All right. So what's the biggest insight you get when something like that happens to you? Your health is everything. It doesn't matter what kind of car you drive. It doesn't matter what kind of trip you're hoping to go on. If you lose your health, everything fundamentally changes. So that was the biggest realization. Thank God we had done all of our bucket list trips just before COVID descended on us. Our last bucket list trip was Australia and New Zealand. So it wasn't like we were sitting there saying, God, we never got to Antarctica. You know, we had got all of that done. So, and that's another thing. Don't put off travel. Don't think, well, let's go next year. If the two of you or the one of you or whatever are ready to travel and you can travel and you have your health, travel, because you just don't know. Anything can change. And I'm just one example of that. So now, obviously, there's two of us in this fight. Janet is the brains, and I'm the factory at the back end. And once you get into the side effects of chemo, you really know what that means. Without her, I'm not quite sure how I would have done this, and how single people or people without family nearby do it is beyond me, because the amount of detail that you have to take in and administer as to appointments, as to medications, as to what, when, and how is enormous. And of course, the patient has chemo brain, which is, or chemo fog, however you choose to describe it. But you literally, your brain is like a goulash. You can, you know, we all complain about our brains as we get older, but this is to a whole new level. So I don't know how people who are going through chemo, I don't know how they keep straight. And this is where like pastoral care really comes into sharp focus, where people need help. Even people who you wouldn't previously have thought needing help. But anyway, Janet's just been a brick, as you would expect. And it is really the two of you who are in it together. So, and, you know, I think for the spouse, they're going through different things, you know, whereas the patient is wondering, okay, what does this mean? And when does it mean it? The spouse has a whole different version of that, which is, when will I be alone? And how will I construct my life when I'm alone? And of course, they can't talk about that, or at least I encourage Janet to talk about it, but, you know, impossible. It's a big deal. It's a big deal for spouse. It's also a big deal for the rest of your family. Now, I have very strong feelings about end of life care that I really, I don't think there's a prize for staying alive as long as you can, no matter how much drool is going into your drool cup on a daily basis. That's not, I don't want to live that life. So Janet and I have a very clear understanding on that. She also has made sure I have a very clear understanding that she's not quite as extreme as I am. And anyway, you can only do what the law allows you to do. But for me, that's a really big deal. Because the last thing I would want is to drain the financial resources to live a life I don't want to live. And so that was clear between the two of us, but we then had to talk to the kids about it, because that kind of thing can become a, one kid says, there's no way dad would have wanted that, blah, blah, blah. So I had a very clear conversation with all four of the children. Again, the children are minimum age 30, as to what my wishes were, and that mom understood what my wishes were, and that she was the boss of that decision-making process when it came around. And they all adapted to that very quickly. Although not something anyone wants to talk about, I think it is the kind of thing, and that's kind of another point that I want to make, is that a lot of the things that we don't talk about with our spouse or with our children, we need to avoid deathbed dramas, and those are very ugly from everything I've seen. So you don't want that kind of thing. The family needs to know what the wishes are, and the family needs to say out loud that they're going to accede to those wishes. So let me check my notes here. And of course, all of this is happening in COVID, and COVID has made everything harder. Everything, whatever you're dealing with, even if it's, you're working from home, or you're doing Zooms, or COVID just makes everything harder. And everything's smaller. Through most of this period, you couldn't go out. You couldn't go to a restaurant. Even outside, you couldn't go to a restaurant. So for somebody who's kind of dealing with the treatment of a cancer, it's even more so, because you're just, or it feels more so, just because you're already confined to a life you weren't expecting to be living. And now you're confined to where you can go in the community to live that life. So that was a big deal. Now, pancreatic is among the worst cancers. I knew that before I got the diagnosis. It's really not a kinder, gentler one. It's one that is pretty fatal. The one cure is the Whipple surgery, and Sherm was a maestro of that at Stanford for part of his career. It's really a surgery where they go in and really rewire your abdomen. They take things out, they reconnect things. Sherm, I'm massacring this. How would you describe the Whipple?
John, you're explaining things extremely well. It's a big deal. It removes because the problem with the pancreas is it's right at the junction of a lot of the intestinal tract communications, and it secretes, as you mentioned, bile and pancreatic enzymes. And we used to joke in the OR that if God had meant the pancreas to be operating on, he wouldn't have put it where he did, because it's way in the back of the abdominal cavity up against the spine. That's why many people get back pain, but it's very difficult to operate on, and it's important to go where they do a lot of them, because there are things you learn as you go along that you can't learn in the beginning, and it's a big deal, and you need patients to be in as good condition as possible for that surgery. The other thing I told John that I'm so impressed about him is his attitude is incredible. And as a surgeon, we don't like our patients to be depressed or upset or terrified. And John seems to be one of those unusual people that is not oblivious. He understands the facts very well, and yet he still has a tremendously positive attitude, which is that is a miracle and makes a big difference in terms of surgical outcomes, because our brain and our immune system and our recovery abilities are all linked together. And the other thing I thought it was very good I learned from about John is his communication skills with his wife and with his family. These are all things that are so important for those who are carrying on, but also to understand what's happening at the moment. And so John is doing things as well as you can. And it's harder to take care of smart people like John because they understand everything. And a lot of people that are less sophisticated, they really don't understand what's going on. In some ways, that's good because they can't do anything about it anyway. And so John has an extra burden with his brains. And but my hat is off to him because it's an extraordinary attitude that he has. And when he understands things so well as he does, it's great. But he and Janet are a terrific team, and they're tackling this problem as best as possible to do.
Well, when I get that kind of compliment from Sherm, somebody who climbed Mount Everest in his 70s or whenever the heck it was, when he's saying I have a great attitude, that counts. That counts.
Well, but John, it really makes a difference, and the immune system is so wound up with the psychology and attitude of what's going on in the brain that people who have a positive attitude literally do better with all kinds of surgery. And as a surgeon who did a lot of different things, if I got somebody who was depressed, I was very unhappy about those, and you can't give people attitude adjustments in the short time you have before surgery, so you have to deal with it. But anyway, John is a miracle patient, and his surgeons are lucky to have a patient like him.
Thank you, Sherm. So we went into chemo. I just looked at my clock. Oh my God, it's 20 to 8. How did that happen? Okay, I'm going to have to put the pedal to the metal here. Well, you start with chemo, as you would imagine. And so we were introduced to a surgeon at Yale by the same guy who got me into Norwalk Emergency immediately, Dr. Hale. And the surgeon's name is Dr. Salem. And as Sherm says, you have to go to one of these guys who's done a lot of them, and he does 60 a year. So we were very fortunate to get to him quickly. So at this point, we're on his list. We're hoping that when he does the initial examination, says we need it to shrink a little bit to pull away from some of the blood vessels. So get in for chemo. So we did that, and then the first set of chemo started off brutally. The second week was just a comedy of errors. I wasn't laughing at that comedy of errors, but that is one thing I would also say is you got to have humor. I think part of my attitude comes from growing up in a house where you pretty much poked fun at everything. And you kind of looked for that little germ of whatever was in there to take some air out of the balloon, take some pressure out of the situation. So that I think helped, but not in that particular week when everything went sideways. But eventually the chemo, I got to tolerating it reasonably well. And you start off with like 4 months of chemo, and then they take some serious pictures and decide whether they're going to do anything. Well, at the end of the 4 months of chemo, it had basically shrunk only about 10%. But Dr. Salem took a look at the pictures and said, I think we're going to try it. I think we're going to give it a try. And he was clearly somebody who would not give it a try if he thought it was a vain attempt, because they've got their success rates, obviously, and then they're very proud of them and protect them very, very seriously. So he said, no, we're going to give it a try. We scheduled the surgery. We were sort of getting prepped for that. And 2 days before the date of the surgery, he had a final conversation with the surgeon, the cardiovascular surgeon who would be with him in the room, because the difficult part was being able to separate the tumor from the blood flow. And it was really the smaller vessels that were the worry, because you can always take a little bit out of a big vessel and reattach it. but with a little vessel, you have no chance of doing that. So the vascular surgeon said there's just not enough room between some of these capillaries or whatever they're called and the tumor to get a scalpel through. And that was a game stopper. So that was tough. That was probably the nadir. That was because, you know, what I've been told is this is the only cure. You get the surgery, it's a cure. Now, it's not quite that straightforward, obviously. And it was a serious surgery, as Sherm said. But now the one opportunity I have to say, okay, I'm cured, in quotes even, appears to be gone. So that was a dark day. That was a dark day for both of us. And so then you just say, okay, well, let's select from the available alternatives. Okay, what are the available alternatives? Are to give up or to go on with the next series of chemo. So obviously we went on with the next series of chemo, which didn't seem to be as tough as the first set of chemo. In one, the first set of chemo, you had chemo for one day, you went left with a pump with poison in the pump. The chemo is poison. That's part of what happens. So, and it feels like it because your body is fighting it. So lost my train of thought there for a minute. But we got onto the second set of chemo, and it wasn't quite as difficult as the first one to begin with. But then it seemed to take a bit of a turn. We then wound up with the surgeon that's attached to Norwalk taking a look at the set of pictures that Dr. Frank had just taken and saying, we have to do a duodenal bypass. His stomach is blown up like a beach ball. It's just taking up every piece of available space it can find. And it was because, as Sherm said, everything is connected to everything. And the tumor seemed to have shifted a little bit. So now it was impinging on the duodenum's ability to do its job and for anything to get through. And I was throwing up, which of course you would do if your contents of your stomach don't have anything else to do with it. And that's how we had basically got the extra pictures and the decision that we would do the bypass. Now, somebody looked that up on, it might have been one of you, it's somebody at the church, I think, looked it up and said, it's amazing to me because it's an operation you do when you're trying to lose weight. Well, I had already lost 25 pounds at that point, so weight loss was not something I was particularly interested in. So they did the duodenal bypass or duodenal, whatever it is. And that was a pretty big surgery too. I was in for, I think, about 4 days. And then they let me out, but with sort of care at home so that nothing would go seriously wrong. And a couple of days after I got home, we had other symptoms that said things clearly are not right in the intestinal area. So we had to go back in, which was not encouraging, to say the least, and not fun because, you know, one of the things they did when I had the surgery is they pushed something up your nose and right down into your stomach, which is not comfortable, shall we say. And that has to stay in until they're absolutely comfortable that, you know, whatever it's getting through to where it has to get through to is working. So this was not great. This was hard because when you're in the hospital, really you're shuffling along the hallways. There's really not much you could do. You're shuffling along the hallways. And by the time we were finished with the second admission, I was probably had spent about 3 weeks in bed, other than shuffling along the hallway to the extent I could. And your muscles atrophy when you're in bed for 3 weeks. So that was very frustrating. And obviously that was something that we couldn't just let lie. So I got, when they did send me out, what had happened was that that they had given me too high a dose of Eliquis. So the blood was, coursing much more quickly than it should. And there were a couple of areas where there was an infection, and it was, spreading it around as opposed to curing it. So that's what wound up putting me back in the hospital. And they were able to kind of get to grips with that. And, but by the time I was done, it was 3 weeks. So then I'm at home, and I've got home care, and I've got a woman giving me a program, lovely woman from Waveney, giving me a program with trying to get some muscle built back. And then sort of at the end of the second week, I guess, of being at home, we decided I would rejoin the Y, because that was when things felt like they were reasonably safe. And that was a godsend. It still is a godsend. That's where I'm going. That's why I'm dressed for a workout right now. I'm meeting my trainer at 8:30. It was a godsend because she's helping me actually do things that are not harmful, not dangerous, but are addressing the muscles that need to be addressed, the arms, the legs, the core, all that kind of thing. And, the other benefit to getting back into the Y, that was always a part of my routine, when I was at home, even when I was working. The Y was, I went to the Y 2 or 3 times a week. So that was a routine. Getting a routine that got me out of the house back to something that was part of my real life was powerful, and is powerful. And Janet can really notice the change in the mentality, the physicality, the attitude, etc. Because I must confess that on occasion, my attitude does slip a bit at home. Sure. There is the odd morning. Typically, it's morning 2 after chemo, where I sit here at my desk and throw the toys out of the pram and say it's all blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So anyway, so from her point of view, just having me got to have something else that can be a part of the routine of my days, it's a really good thing. Scanning to see things. I mean, all 4 kids visited me before I was sort of done with the recovery from the surgery. And that's lovely, but it's also a bit, oh dear, they think something could happen. And they don't want to not have seen me again before that something happens. So it was really good to have them all here individually. They came separately so that they got some one-on-one time, and so did I. But it also was physically exhausting, because when you have your children with you and you're quite sick, you are trying very hard to project strength and comfort and all that kind of stuff. And that is really exhausting. So by the time all children had done their cycle through, I was quite tired, but I could also now start to get back into some kind of a routine. We're doing some traveling. We went to Germany in the fall. I had a board meeting, and we spent some time in Munich, which has a lot more history than I was aware of, Third Reich type history. And that was good. Then we went up for spring break in Canada to see all of our children came back for that. My son's now in Vancouver. My daughter's in Peru, but moving to the UK. She just flew out yesterday. So they all made it there. And so we had 4 granddaughters, and all children there. It was wonderful, absolutely lovely. Kids all had matching pajamas and all that. We did the whole shtick. So it was very nice. I'm just making sure that I've covered all the things I really wanted to cover. I'm stunned that it's taken me until 7:55 to do that.
I told you, it always goes
I-
by very quickly. Yes.
My sympathies to all of you.
John, how about taking some questions?
By all means, sorry. Armin.
John, what has all of this meant to you in terms of your spiritual journey?
That's a great question, one I meant to address. And my spiritual journey it has reinforced to me something that I've always had, which is a conviction that there is no way our bodies and the bodies of all the animals and fish and birds and the nature, there's no way it could all be purely due to evolution. But I'm not a biblical Christian, as you know, Armin. You and I have talked about it, and I've talked about it with Scott and probably with some others of you. To me, my spiritual journey is more around how one lives with others and how one interacts with others. And it's not based on a conviction of one or another faith, formal faiths. But what it has done, Armin, is, Mary's come to see me a couple of times and she's been wonderful. It just reinforces to me the importance of a faith community, however we define faith. We at FPC are very fortunate. We have a really great community of people, and that includes the people who are soldiers in the faith and those who are values followers of the faith. So yeah, it's probably not a great answer for you, Armin, but it's an honest answer.
Thank you so much, John. And it is amazing because I was going to try and stop you around 7:45 to take some questions, but you were right in the thick of things, so I didn't want to slow things down. So here we go again. We're going to have part 3, John Lanaway, right? And
well, I think, yeah, the women are going to storm the Bastille if you try and keep them out of these meetings.
Anyway, so thank you very much, John, for sharing that. Very inspiring, and we are so glad that you're doing okay. We had a conversation last summer, and then you're going to Canada, and then all of a sudden you were back, and what happened? Yeah. It's been so inspiring to see how you've carried on with this journey. So maybe we'll figure out how to get some questions to you later on. But Scott, if you don't mind leading us with a quick